Hi everyone. I know it's kind of weird. I'm doing two videos in 1 week. It's kind of unheard of. I'm really just pushing myself to my limit. But I wanted to make this kind of a more, laid back, not as researched or scripted video as opposed to the ones that I put out before. Because I just really want to follow up on my first video that I ever posted on YouTube. That video, of course, being the 9 most disturbing books that I have ever read, which is probably the most viewed video that I'll ever get, and it's the one that's gotten the most people to subscribe to my channel, which I am so grateful for. And I only see it fit that, if that's what people are interested in, who am I to deny them of more? And I really do love that video, and I love making videos of that nature because, as you know by now, I love disturbing literature, transgressive literature. It's kind of like my thing. And yeah, I just wanted to follow up on that, make some remarks before I get started. I just looked at my channel today and I have hit 200 subscribers. That's what, it's incredible. Like, thank you so much. I honestly have no words, it's 200 subscribers. That's incredible. I still can't even wrap my mind around that. It's that so many people are interested in hearing me talk and what I have to say about, books, which is the thing that I love most, is just incredible. So thank you so much to everybody who has subscribed, and also to everybody who's watched my first video and liked it and left comments. That video is up to like 3,000 views now, which is unbelievable to me. And that's kind of why I want to follow up on it, because so many people have left comments and made remarks and left suggestions, which I want to talk about, because I want to show like I'm really reading everybody's comments. I'm really taking everybody into account, and I really appreciate the conversation that video has started. And also, just want to, of course, as the title says, I want to keep recommending these books to you, because I know that so many people are interested in them, myself included. And if you want to hear more of my suggestions, then I'll keep bringing them out. It's so much fun. And yeah, I have also gotten so much positive reception on my other videos where I suggest readings for specific kinds of literature, or go into like deep dives of certain kinds of narratives, as I did in my previous video. And it's just, incredible that so many people are watching me. Like, all my videos have consistently received like 100, 200 views. That's incredible. I mean, when I posted my first video and I saw it, it was like 45 minutes of me rambling. Like, who's going to want to watch that? But so many of you have, and I'm like, thank you so much. That just means so much to me. I mean, especially seriously during these times that are so uncertain, and you don't really know what's going on. It's so nice to have this space on YouTube where I can just go and have just such positive conversations about literature, about books. It's incredible. So I can't stress it enough. I can't say it enough. Thank you so much for all the support that I've been receiving, and just hoping to keep going and keep giving you guys what you want. So yeah, I am gonna make this video. This is gonna be the 5 more disturbing books that I've ever read. Just to kind of remark on that, I'm titling it 5 more disturbing books I have read. It doesn't mean that these are more disturbing than the 9 I already talked about. It's kind of like these are 5 additional books that are disturbing. Because I even said it in that video, I'm not really into like ranking things by level of disturbingness, because that's just kind of, extremely subjective, first of all, but also for my own opinions, I wouldn't even really know where to get like a scale or measurement to say, oh, this book is more disturbing than this one. Like, I think they're all disturbing for their own unique reasons, and I think that's kind of like what literature is about. It's about like what kind of interior conflict or reaction it gets out of you. And it, your experiences with books can be extremely different, and the whiplash of this is more disturbing than this is a highly personal experience. So that's why I'm opening it with that. Like, these are 5 additional disturbing books that I have read, just so there's no confusion. Also, it's so hot in this room. And it's January, so aka now I live in California, right? So at first, I actually want to open not with my list, but with you guys' list. I have here open on my computer. You can't see it, but I've compiled some of the comments that I've received on like suggestions or people's answers to like what the most disturbing books they have read are. And I'm going to kind of briefly go through those because I think I got some really amazing suggestions. Some I have already read and can confirm that, yeah, they're pretty out there. And some I hadn't heard of them until people left comments. So, I also appreciate the suggestions. And on all my videos, of all the topics that I'm touching on, if you have any suggestion about any of them, like, please leave a comment because I'm always looking for new stuff to read. So now I'm going to be reading off some of the comments that people left with suggestions and, just say thank you to all of you who have commented. And yeah, here we go. This is you guys' list of most disturbing books. Axe Daddy said, we had this kind of like confusion with some of the comments that he left that YouTube removed for some reason. And that's another thing. Like, if you leave a comment and then you don't see it after that, like, leave me another comment if you can. YouTube has been removing some comments from my videos. I don't know why. And I think, for this one, it was in that video of queer horror literature that I made. I suspect, and I even said it in the video, maybe YouTube doesn't like the word queer, which is so stupid. But, I don't know what's going on. If anybody has any knowledge of like YouTube and how commenting works, if you could let me know, because I see the notifications of the comments that you leave, but then I go to the actual video and sometimes they're not there. So I don't know what's happening. But anyway, we had a conversation about a book that Axe Daddy had read of that he thought was an appropriate addition to the queer horror literature titles that I was discussing. And he talked about The Wasp Factory by Iain Banks, which I agree it's very disturbing book, and it's also quite sexual in nature. I'm not going to spoil anything, but definitely this is a really peculiar work of transgenderism and hypersexual conflicts, and I agree 100% with you on this comment. This is definitely a solid title to recommend when it comes to queer horror, and very disturbing indeed. So there's that one. David Carlson, you said, I was so psyched that you had the Story of the Eye. Story of the Eye is incredible. And he said, have you read Les Chants de Maldoror by Comte de Lautreamont? Forgive my pronunciation. And he said that one's really, really, really disturbing. I had actually never heard of this book. And then I looked up some details on it. And in my How and What to Read series that I'm starting, where I'm discussing sort of esoteric or misunderstood genres of literature and then giving recommendations, I do have a plan on making a video on surreal literature. I was trying to work myself through Nadia by André Breton, and that one I've been struggling to get through. So I don't know how soon that video would happen because I need to read books that are of that category. But I looked up Le Chant de Maldoror. Apparently is a surreal work of disturbing literature. So I will be getting to that. I don't know when. I can't make any promises. I'm over promising people that I'm going to read a book until a certain date because I hardly ever follow up. But I'm so happy that now is in my radar because it sounds exactly like the kind of book that I want to include in a future video. So thank you so much for that. And I'm really curious to see what's so disturbing about it, and I have a feeling I'm going to be unpleasantly surprised, but in a good way. But thank you for your comment. Gracie's mom, 62, who's left a couple of comments on my video, so thank you so much for that. She said, I'm 58 years old and a big reader, always have been. I'm happy to hear that you're enjoying my videos. And she says, thanks for the list. And then she left her own list. She's Come Undone by Wally Lamb, which I've never heard of. Geek Love by Katherine Dunn, which I'd never heard of. But then I looked up the synopsis for it, and I was like, okay, I need to read this. It's apparently about like deformities and like some kind of like obsession with this like deformed children or something like that. I need to read that, so I'm probably gonna end up reading that. Thank you. And then she also said The Color Purple by Alice Walker. That one I have read. I agree that it's kind of very disturbing subject matter, obviously. It not disturbing, I think, in the sense of the other books that I talked about, but yes, this is kind of a really sort of in-depth look at female suffering, and it's, I think ultimately kind of uplifting in some ways, and I feel like Alice Walker's stories tend to be like that. Empowering and uplifting in some way, even in the face of despair. But yes, this is a very graphic and hard to get through read. I agree with that. So Gracie's mom, 62, thank you so much for your comment. And up next, not one, not two, but three people recommended that I read Là-bas, the Damned by Joris-Karl Huysmans, because in that video I talked about his other book, Against Nature. So Ivan Dean, Caleb Kerr, and Seamus Gaelic, all three of you said, check out Down There or The Damned or Là-bas by Joris-Karl Huysmans. It's about, telling me it's about black masses, saying it's about very disturbing, violent sections, and, Caleb Kerr says it's become one of my favorite books. The novel seems to have influenced how people within media portray satanic cults and their practices. Seamus, you said you second Caleb's recommendation. It's possibly the best novel about the occult that I've ever read. I think what makes it so fascinating is how matter-of-fact Huysmans was in treating the subject matter. And I can say that matter-of-factly voice is also present in Against Nature, which is one of the reasons why it was so difficult to get through. And then saying also, knowing that it was being discussed in the novel is based upon actual events and characters makes the story that much more horrific. I did mention this in my What I Read in 2020 video, but just to reiterate, thank you so much for all the recommendations. I would have never found this without them. So I am going to be reading this for sure. So thank you. Next, Luliana P. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. She said, for me, it was Lolita. I think it scarred me for life. I agree with that. And, when I topped the list, and I do kind of want to talk about this because I think it's important. I topped the list of my first video with Tampa by Elisa Nutting, saying that it's the book that I just closed up and just didn't even bother. And I received another comment that I couldn't find it, and I wanted to put it up here, but I seriously could not find it. Was saying basically like, it's kind of interesting that all the books, or pretty much like all the books that I talked about in that video were about male characters enacting horrible violence on women, and that I had no problem reading those, and that all of a sudden with Tampa, when it was a female perpetrator assaulting a male child, and, that's the one that I had the most problem with. And I think that kind of discussion sort of reels into Lolita. And I kind of addressed that in the latest book, in the latest video that I put up about the book that I cannot read. Sort of saying, for me, it was all about voice, but I welcome those critiques, and I'm always thinking about them and internalizing them, because that's kind of the point of opening discussions about literature of this nature, to keep talking about the nature of violent depictions in media, and what they actually mean. And I wanted to sort of be thankful, I think, to most of the viewers that I've gotten for sort of being understanding, because when I put up that video, the first thing I thought was 45 minutes of me talking about, like, you know, sexual assault and murder and all these things, and people are probably going to be like, what's wrong with this guy? Like, why is he so into literature of that sort? But then I think everybody's pretty understanding, and also, you know, pretty on the boat with reading that kind of stuff, and sort of understanding, you know, that it's not that we enjoy the violence. It's not that we condone or glorify or endorse that kind of violence, but more that I think these books are addressing things that are left unaddressed pretty much anywhere else, and that sort of morbid fascination with extreme acts of violence, I think, comes from the deep abjection that we feel towards them, and that's something that I think it's important to keep a dialogue going in regards to, because I feel like, you know, it's usually these transgressive artists, writers, filmmakers, etc., that are the only ones talking about violence, where everybody else sort of pushes it aside, or you know, deems it subject matter not meriting any discussion, when it's quite the opposite in reality. You know, even thinking of something like Wes Craven, who was this like liberal sort of peace and love hippie guy who made The Last House on the Left, considered one of the most disturbing and violent films ever shot. But you know, his message being like, this is the state of discontent and disgust and horror. For him, you know, it was Vietnam, that era, and you know, sort of presenting it and leaving it up to discussion. I think that's what's important, and I think that's the nature of a lot of literature of this kind. And returning to this, I think Lolita is really disturbing, and I would say, you know, the acts that are depicted in here are no better or no more digestible than, you know, what's in Tampa. And I sort of wanted to make the point that, you know, yes, they're at the base of the discussion of these two books is the question of gendered violence, you know, which in Tampa sort of reverses what we see in Lolita, where, you know, the predator is female and the victim is male. And does that make it any more palatable? My honest answer is no, of course it doesn't. But what I was getting at in the video I made of the book I Cannot Read is that it's the voice that's telling the story that you know, really makes things just unbearable to me, in a sense that I'm like, I don't want to go through this. I don't like this, because the voice in Tampa by Asa Nonami is just much more frank and you know, to the point and explicit in a lot of ways. Whereas Nabokov, I mean, the reason behind, you know, the cementing Lolita as a classic of literature is because Nabokov has a very persuasive, ornate, and beautiful voice with which he's telling these barbaric and horrific acts that Humbert is enacting or fantasizing about. And I think, you know, that might just make this even more disturbing at the end of the day. But, you know, in terms of readability, I think this is more readable than Tampa. Again, it's that voice that I'm getting at. You know, it's not excusing the violence or saying one mode of violence is better or more bearable than the other. It's sort of saying the narrative in which it is told is vastly different. But I get that this could be 1,000 times more disturbing than Tampa if we really think about it. And, you know, the fact that it's more readable might just add to that. So it's an interesting discussion to keep in mind and to keep going with. And I really appreciate, again, I'm not feeling, you know, it's unwarranted criticism, or I'm not feeling attacked or any of that. Like, the purpose of my channel is to open discussions of this kind. And so, you know, I'm saying thank you for those comments, and, you know, I'm happy to keep talking about it. And they are important discussions to have with literature of this nature. Up next, Michael Dadon, I'm sorry, I don't know, said, wow, all of these books are super interesting. I love transgressive fiction. I hear you. And he said, you should read Haunted by Chuck Palahniuk. He wrote Fight Club, one of the best horrific, disturbing books I've ever read, and I think you'd really enjoy it. Thank you for that suggestion. I have read Haunted, and I loved it. and of Guts, the shorts. This is basically, there's a frame narrative, but it's basically in essence a collection of short stories. There's a story in here called Guts, which is like one of the most infamous short stories ever written. I do have a video in mind that I started scripting that's gonna feature Guts, by Chuck Palahniuk in a very interesting way, and I think it's gonna be really cool. So I'm not gonna say too much about that, but this is gonna come back in my channel, so look forward to that. But yes, amazing book, and amazing author Chuck Palahniuk, an openly gay author who might well be, a contributor to queer horror or queer fiction. I know for a fact Fight Club is very homoerotic in nature, so we all love that. Again, one more comment got lost with YouTube, prying them from my hands. I don't know what's happening, but someone else had mentioned, of course, American Psycho by Bret Easton Ellis. I have read it. Yes, it's very disturbing. I didn't include it in my video because I was trying to go with more sort of like less heard of disturbing books, because I'm trying to like give suggestions to people who may have already gone through like the staple transgressive disturbing books. And I know for a fact American Psycho is included in most lists of this nature, and I would say rightfully so. It is very disturbing indeed. But yes, I have read it. It's great. I just didn't include it because I wanted to talk about other sort of less spoken of books. And then Lacey Snow, who was actually, I think you were the first comment or one of the first comments I ever got. So thank you so much. And you've commented another video, so thank you so much for the support. You said Tampa really fucked me up. Sis, I hear you. So disturbing, it's so intriguing, it's worth pushing through if you can't get to the end, even though it's really hard to read. I don't know if I can, but maybe one day I'll try. I don't know. Literally on my list for next YouTube video for books I recommend. So I don't know if that video ever went up, but go ahead and check her out if you're interested, because I feel like she talks about disturbing books as well. So go check out her channel if you're interested. You said, I can't wait to see more of your reads. Well, I've been churning it out in these past months. She said, check out my Dark Vanessa. It's relatable to Tampa, yet not as disturbing, but important. And she also apparently thought The Room was insane. So you're one of my people. So my Dark Vanessa, I have never heard of this book. And I don't think I ever really looked into it, or maybe I did and I just don't remember. It was 6 months ago. I'm sorry. But if it's related to Tampa, again, it's depending on how it's told. Maybe I'll get to it. But maybe, yeah, I guess, or if you're interested in books like that, my Dark Vanessa, if anyone else knows anything more about it, let me know. I might just read it. And then last but not least, and I'm sorry if I missed any other comments or suggestions in that video. Like I said, I just before hitting record, I was going through the comments. These are the ones I found. If YouTube took down your comment, I'm so sorry about that. I don't know why that's happening. Just, leave me another comment if I don't reply, because I reply to everything. So if I'm not replying, check that your comment's still there. And if it's not, leave me another comment, please. I want to have conversations with everybody that wants to talk to me. Of course, it's an open channel for everybody. But the last comment that I was able to grab on here was from Nancy Ledford. She said The Shoemaker, which was based on a real person, and that she could not finish it. I believe she is talking about The Shoemaker by, I had the author's name here, Flora, Rheta, Schreiber. Though there's been a lot of books that have been written about this guy. I believe she is talking about the serial killer Joseph Callinger, who I actually heard an entire episode that the last podcast on the left did on him. He was, it's called a shoemaker because that was his profession. Apparently he was this violent schizophrenic guy who got his children to aid him in murdering several people, like his 12-year-old kids. It's absolutely astonishing. It's just holy crap, you know. I'm actually that opens up an interesting kind of discussion. I'm actually really not that into like true crime. Like I've listened to like the last podcast on the left. I've listened to My Favorite Murder. I've listened to Sword and Scale, others like the podcasts that focus on like true crime and serial killers and stuff like that. Listening to some of these people talk about them makes it a little more bearable. Again, it's all about the voice, right? It's all about the voice. Because some of these podcasts infuse like comedy, like they make some comedic comments on some of the things that they're talking about, and that makes it a little more bearable. And they don't do it like in a disrespectful way. They do it kind of like, you know, in an anxious, like trying to diffuse the situation kind of deal. But just picking up a book about true crime and getting through it. Like for example, I got this book a while ago, Panzram, a journal of murder, which is basically like a dictated autobiography by Carl Panzram, who was a serial killer. And I it's just too much. Like I don't know. It's kind of like with Tampa. You know, Tampa is very similar to these kinds of books in that it does feel like a first person account of the facts, like laid out bare in front of you. I think that's why, you know, to me, transgressive and disturbing literature is different, because they have not necessarily the ornateness, but like the different style of narrative that comes with fiction, you know, which is absent in books of this nature, and that's what makes them really kind of hard for me to get through. So yeah, but the Shoemaker sounds like something I'm good with not reading. But I can definitely understand why it would be included on a list like this. So those are your suggestion. That's your list. Thank you so much. And the comments keep coming, and please keep them coming. I'm always interested on hearing like what people have to say. A new suggestion always pops up every few days about like, have you heard of this book? And I'm like, I have not heard of that book. Let me check it out. So thank you so much. This video is for you all. And now, without further ado, let me get into the suggestions that I have for you on 5 more disturbing books that I've read. 5 additional disturbing books that I have read. And I'm trying to keep it, you know, like trying to keep it varied. Some of them are, you know, straight up disturbing graphic descriptions of violence, as we all are used to, but some are disturbing for different kinds of reason, and I'm gonna get into that. So I'm trying to keep it a little more original. I'm trying to keep it more diverse. So let's go ahead and dive into that. Okay, so first I have for you Crash by J.G. Ballard. J.G. Ballard is notorious as one of the most transgressive, out there authors. This was turned into a film by David Cronenberg, which came out in 1996, which sort of reignited the discussion and the pearl clutching when it comes to, you know, this story. This was published in 1973 or early 70s. So back in that day, I don't think anybody was that used to something quite like this coming about. This is a book essentially about people who are turned on, who are sexually aroused by car crashes and car accidents. I found it quite funny when Roger Ebert was reviewing the film adaptation of Cronenberg. He gave it a positive review, but he was saying, it's kind of fascinating because Ballard and Cronenberg are telling stories about things that are not real, something that's just so absurd and humanly impossible. And now, with the internet, and now that we've seen the depravity of mankind much more closely and personal than we had ever hoped we would, I'm not so sure how well his words stand. This is a book that it's really about, and it's really the style of Ballard himself. And when he tells any story, I'm actually a big fan of his works. He tells stories about humanity, and he tells stories that are relevant to the way that we interact with the world. statistically, I don't have the numbers at hand, but as we know, like when you get into a car and when you drive, statistically, you are very likely to end up in an accident, and yet we still do it, because we have to, or because we keep those statistics, those possibilities in the back of our mind. I drive constantly back and forth all over California. And it really sort of sets into perspective that we sort of grow complacent, or we grow sort of at peace in a way with destruction and depravity, such as cars and the road represent. I think that's the crux of what Ballard is exploring in here, and I think that's the message that's so often misunderstood. I think people tend to read this just as a book of straight up depravity with no sense or form. Ballard does not write books like that. In fact, he writes books that are very sort of humanly relevant, and that's what makes them the most disturbing. There's description after description of mangled faces, mangled bodies, open wounds, the debris, the fire and brimstone of a car explosion, sex acts involving open wounds and viscera. And my God, this is one of the ballsiest books that I have ever read. And Ballard, when it comes to disturbing literature, I'm kind of even regretful that I didn't include him in my first video, because he is definitely one of the masters of disturbing and transgressive literature. And if you're interested in film, David Cronenberg's adaptation, I think Ballard himself said, was superior to his book. I disagree with that notion. I disagree with the author about his novel, but I think the book is actually quite more unsettling than the film. But they're both very, very good. I think the Criterion Collection just recently put out a Blu-ray version of Crash. So if you're interested, that's widely available now as well. But yes, this is definitely something that stays with you, and something that, for being a book from the 70s, goes further than you would even think humanly possible. It goes too into things, and it's amazing. And then this particular version has an introduction by Zadie Smith, who was another really famous British author, and it adds really interesting perspective to the book. I think she even compares, our fascination with celebrities and their ultimate destructions. I think when she wrote it, there was the whole thing with Lindsay Lohan getting DUIs, and she calls it, isn't that just a sort of macabre foreplay for what we're hoping is going to happen to her? Like, definitely really, really prevalent ideas about society. They're so prevalent today, and Ballard was writing about them way back when. So he's true visionary as to that disgusting perversity of mankind. He was really akin to that. So this book is great for that. Next up, we have another highly controversial book, and I think the Me Too movement and our broader cultural understanding of sexual assault and consent and, power dynamics within workplaces and education, I think that this book has an added level of disgustingness and perversity that perhaps wasn't as prevalent when it was first published in the 90s. This is Disgrace by J.M. Coetzee. I mentioned this book in my What I Read in 2020 video briefly. J.M. Coetzee, I actually really like his writing. As I mentioned in that video, his novel Waiting for the Barbarians is one of my favorite novels ever. This explores similar themes. It's also set in, Waiting for the Barbarians is set in a nondescript area, but J.M. Coetzee is a South African author, and South Africa and apartheid feature heavily in his works, this being no exception. And it's basically, I think the title mostly says it all. It's about this professor at a university, David Lurie, who is this kind of selfish womanizer who is, always going around hiring sex workers and, sleeping with staff at his university and then never talking to them again. And eventually he lures one of his students to his apartment, gives her some alcohol, and then what he calls, and what a lot of uh, critics or readers of this book, that they call that he has an affair with her, or he, has a night of adventure with her. But, as we understand, it's none of that. He rapes her, and he continues to do that for a couple of times. And I think it's kind of interesting that, that word is even contested by the narrator himself. And he says it wasn't exactly rape. It was kind of more like a gray area between this and that. But I think that's what really made it disturbing for me. And that's just the opening of the book. Eventually, he is tried by his university. He's found guilty of having, elicited, this sexual assault with his student. He is fired from the university, and he goes back to live with his daughter out in the country. She lives alone. They are attacked by, a gang of local African sort of wanderers around that area, and the distinction being that David Lurie and his daughter are white, and the people that they are surrounded by, and the attackers that rob him and rape his daughter, they are black. So there's that racial dynamic as well in it, and it's sort of like this progression of David Lurie falling into this state of disgrace and violence, and just so derelict and void of anything by the end of it. And of course, the questions that it rises about sexual assault, that it rises about consent, are also particularly of note in today's society. Especially, I think this book merits some serious reassessment about some of the content of its pages. But I would say this was just so disturbing, just in terms of the seeing the fall from grace, the destruction of the human spirit being told so matter of factly and straightforward, which is one of Coetzee's gifts as a writer. And just reading it was just not enjoyable by any terms. But I do think it's an important book, and it's an important book about race, about that kind of, socioeconomic separation, about violence against women, all of these things that are so, that people don't really want to talk about, or they want to tiptoe around. That they're in full display here in Coetzee's books, and told from the point of view of a main character who's not likable by any ways, and in fact is complicit in some of the violence that we should ultimately denounce and criticize. So I think for those reasons, I recommend this book. It is disturbing in sort of very different ways than some of the other books we've talked about, but I do think it's important, and I do think that J.M. Coetzee is a wonderful author, and people should be reading him more. Up next, I am going to be talking about The Cement Garden by Iain McEwan. This is the first novel by Iain McEwan that I've read, and it is the shortest book that I'm going to talk about today. But that is part of the reason why it unsettles me so much. The Cement Garden is told sort of very, as you can see, very briefly, very, Iain McEwan is a man of few words, let's say that. And there's a quietness to the narrative. There's it's from first person point of view of this young boy, who lives with his family, sort of in the derelict, what do they call the prefabs, the sort of akin to not necessarily suburbs, but like this image of British, land development, and then economic hardships as they were prescient during the 80s, eventually leading to this sort of desolate wasteland of abandoned homes, and they live in the middle of this place. And then eventually their parents die, and the children are left to sort of live alone, and they live lives of just incredibly disturbing abandonment. And as I was saying, it's such a short, quiet book, and that's what mostly unsettled me about it. If you want to picture it in some way, just picture this. This book is similar to somebody sitting in front of you, just kind of quietly and calmly describing to you how they murdered somebody. So yeah, that's kind of what I got from this teenage boy growing into a very warped sense of sexuality, and it sort of reflects in the character's disinterest or internalized trauma around death and abandonment and hopelessness and aimlessness. It's such a uniquely like dirty book. It's and it's not necessarily graphic in any way, but the it's that it really is that sort of, you have to read it to believe it. It's Ian McEwan is writing with this quietness, this what's the word I'm looking for? It's just so reserved. It's kind of like, and maybe that's like a cultural trait. This is a British novel, but it's kind of like everything is sort of internalized. Not everything is said, but with the few words with which he writes, I feel like everything is said. And what's being said is just so unsettling and makes you feel dirty. This is kind of like one of those, I need to take a shower after I read this book. And it's so engrossing. Also, I sat down and read this in one day because I just couldn't put it down. It's so morbidly fascinating, and I definitely want to keep reading more of Ian McEwan. I have heard that his other book, The Comfort of Strangers, is similar, so I'm gonna definitely be checking that out. But if you're new to him like I am, I think this is a great place to start. I think that he's moved on past dreary and desolate sort of writing. I think he writes more like historical fiction now, but I think this is definitely right up my alley. I really enjoyed this book, but not in the sense that you would think one enjoys a book. as you know by now, that's the running theme throughout most of these titles. Curiously enough, I'm going to talk about another book that I sat down and read in one day. This is Now You're One of Us by Asa Nonami. This is a book originally published in Japanese. It's about this woman whose name is Noriko, who's marrying into the Shito family because apparently it's just a thing in Japan that sometimes women just have to get married. And she discusses things like, maybe it should be an arranged marriage. Maybe I should just marry the first guy that comes to me. It's such a social pressure. It's not really, it's kind of like the main factor in the beginning of the novel, and then it's never addressed again. But I think that's the running theme throughout it. It's that fear and anxiety around marriage in Japanese culture that, for starters, is what really started to freak me out in the first place. But anyway, she meets this guy who's part of like the Shito family, who are apparently very famous and wealthy around the neighborhood that they live in. And he is like this super charming guy. He says that he loves her and he has a shitload of money, and he's like super nice and comforting. And she says, oh my god, I just won the groom lottery. And she ends up marrying into the family. It's one of those situations, I guess, similar to Rosemary's Baby, kind of like you have a group of seemingly benign and super nice and helpful people, but you can just feel from the beginning pages of their introduction that they're being a little too nice and accepting, and things are just too good to be true, and it starts rousing suspicion in our main character and of course in us, and you are wondering like what's going on. And I also, again, akin to Rosemary's Baby, it's one of those things where nobody believes you. Nobody, everybody thinks you're exaggerating or you're hysterical, etc. Definitely very gendered dismissals of concern. And ultimately, we start to unravel what the mystery is behind the Shito family and the business that they run. And I could not put this book down. I was like, what the hell is going on? It's like it's parts like psychedelic, mind fucks, and then it's also, like this kind of mystery novel, and then it's also a novel about, the socially constructed fragility of women and the disbelief that women face and the constant suppression of ideas and suspicions that women face. And again, it's a book about marriage, and I think marriage, in this book, is shown as being this really perverse institution. And I think especially in Japan, I'm not too familiar with Japanese culture, but I can only imagine if Asa Nonami is writing a book of this kind, it must be such a horror. In fact, I read a lot of the reception that it got in Japan was just women sort of being like, yeah, it's like that. And that's just freaking unbelievable to me. I think this is a wonderful book. It's disturbing just in the sense, it's a lot of the criticism is in the payoff. I'm not going to spoil anything. I'm not going to say, like, ultimately what's revealed about the Shitos, or if there is anything going on. A lot of people, but I will say a lot of people seem to be disappointed, but I think the journey that gets you there and the internal conflict and doubt that the narrator faces is enough to make it so disturbing and uncomfortable. And yet it's one of those books that you just can't put down. I think this is an amazing piece of literature. I'm not sure. Another criticism people have is that it's written very plainly, and I'm not sure if that's how Asa Nonami writes or if it's just the particular translator. But I had no issue with that, honestly, and I thought it was a great book. It's a great read. It's a great sort of short read. Trust me, if you're into that kind of like murder mystery, psychological kind of terror, this is definitely going to do it for you. And I'm curious to see if Asa Nonami has any other translated works in English, because I think she's a phenomenal author, and she definitely has such a disturbing imagination around concepts of womanhood that people would just sort of be quick to dismiss or not think too deeply about. So yeah, if you're interested, this is a phenomenal book. And there's that word again, phenomenal. I've noticed I've been watching back some of my videos and I use that word a lot. I'm gonna try my best to stop. But sometimes, I mean, it's a good word. It's pretty to the point. I think a lot of these books are phenomenal. So if I keep saying it, take my word for it. And then finally, coming in at number 5, and it's going to be it for today. But again, like I said, I think I'm going to keep making this into a series because it's a subject that fascinates me to no end. But for now, my 5th recommendation of most disturbing books I've read is John Dollar by Marianne Wiggins. Marianne Wiggins is here telling us a story that, kind of like with Tampa and Lolita, a lot of people just sort of like to summarize as the female or gender bent version of Lord of the Flies. This takes place in the British colony of Rangoon in Burma, where a school teacher has sort of made her residence teaching schoolgirls, and eventually they go out on a trip into an island. And you can just feel from the start they are so unprepared and unfamiliar with the environment and with the horrors that they are about to face. Eventually they are part of a shipwreck, and I will say for this book things kind of move very slowly. A lot of it revolves around the main character Charlotte's interiority, a lot of her inner thoughts concerning things like, the previous World War that has taken place. This takes place, I think, sometime in the 1920s or 1910s. But then I assure you, if you keep going, the payoff is going to be quite unlike anything you've ever experienced. After the shipwreck, they're sort of the schoolgirls and Charlotte are trapped in this island without any way of getting out or calling for help. And they are sort of depending on this one sailor that was going with them on this trip. The title of the book is the name of the character, John Dollar. They're all sort of relying on him, but you can also feel like he is not all too, adept at saving or providing for these children. And I think eventually you kind of get frustrated at the little girls that are in the story. But it's also very realistic. I mean, I think it's sort of speaking to that socially constructed viewpoint of, I mean, let's face it, it's a socially constructed notion of uselessness of little girls and women, that they are, always in need of help, that they can't fend for themselves. And I think Marianne Wiggins is depicting the sort of psychological effects that has on children, particularly. If it's like a gender bent Lord of the Flies, this definitely makes Lord of the Flies look like Gilligan's Island because this goes into cannibalism and murder and psychological depravity all at the hands of children, which is, I was sort of reading this getting kind of bored, and then when it gets to those certain passages I was like, holy shit, I cannot even believe what I'm reading about. This is really disturbing book. And I think Marianne Wiggins, her skills as a writer are just really, really amazing and fascinating. I think she's definitely she has such a unique voice, and it comes through beautifully in John Dollar. It's not for the faint of heart by any means. In fact, a lot of people had took issue as I was sort of perusing through some of the comments on Goodreads. A lot of people thought that this was just exploitative and just messed up for messed up's sake. But I'd say there's a lot of, interesting things to excavate and dig out when it comes to, gender and colonialism and the sort of overturning of that, sea adventures genre, like, Treasure Island, etc. It takes that and turns it into a nightmare. It's such a fascinating read. It, like I said, be warned, it does move slow, but the payoff is there if you're really interested in getting through it. And there's really not much that I can say I've read that is like John Dollar by Marianne Wiggins. So there's my 5 books for this video. Like I said, I'm gonna try to keep pumping out videos into this disturbing book series. If you have any other recommendations, if you have any other words or comments on the books I talked about, whether it be from the recommendations you had already made or the books that I recommended, I want to hear all about it. Please, let me know if there's anything else that you would like me to make a video on. I am starting to take sort of requests or recommendations more in mind because I know I haven't been doing that in the past. But I kind of wanted to go with making some of the videos that I had in mind for a while. About like queer horror and, unreadability, all these subjects. But I think, I want to start also making videos about things that you guys are interested in, because ultimately this channel and these videos are for you. So there you have it. Thank you so much. Keep reading disturbing books because I know I will. And I will see you for the next installment. And I'll be coming up with more fucked up things to read. So peace.